My name is Nels Bohn. I've been working at the Ithaca Urban Renewal Agency for over 20 years in Ithaca. The agency acts as an agent for the city. We basically manage federal and state grants awarded to the city, and our focus is very much on affordable housing and, to a lesser degree, middle-income housing. We work together on trying to deploy those federal resources to have the greatest impact, and affordable housing is our priority. So that's going to be my area that I can provide shed the most light on that. I also staff the one of the staff members who goes to the Community Housing Development Fund. That's the Cornell County City Fund, which awards funding for affordable housing projects in the county. So I have some involvement at that side as well. Prior to coming to Ithaca, I worked in Kittery, Maine on the coast, working as a town planner, and true direct democracy there in those little town meetings. And then prior to that, it was St. Lawrence County, the largest county in New York, where I worked as a planner. So that's a brief background on my history.
Thanks, Nels. And it's interesting. I know we share a mutual colleague because I used to live in St. Lawrence County, and I knew that that person actually worked here, but I don't know that I knew that you worked there. So I want to hear more about that sometime. That's interesting.
It's Paul Stevens, right?
Yes, of course it was. Of course it was Paul. So next I'm going to move to Kate from Whitham Planning and Design. I actually am afraid I might pronounce your last name incorrectly, so I want to let you do that, Kate. So please introduce yourself, and thanks for being here.
Sure. My name's Kate Chesebrough. I'm here from Whitham Planning and Design. We're a landscape architecture, project management, and planning firm in downtown. The principal of the firm is Scott Whitham, who you may or may not know, but he's been in the community for much longer than I have. So I'm, I think, officially considered an emerging professional. I've been working full-time for just under 5 years now. I'm an associate and landscape architect at the firm. And we do landscape architecture and a lot of public entitlements and outreach work as part of our projects that we work on. So we're often part of project teams of architects, developers, engineers, and you know, we find a lot of value in our project teams, and we try to make the most meaningful projects that we can here in Ithaca and elsewhere.
Thanks very much, Kate. Appreciate that. And next we have Brent Katzmann, who works with Bohn Real Estate. So Brent, tell us more about yourself.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks for having me on the panel. So I'm Brent Katzmann. I am the office manager for Bohn Real Estate for our Ithaca operations. I've been with Bohn about 10 years now, the first half of that as a sales agent, but since then in a management capacity. Prior to that, my wife and I ran a small design build company here in town that we founded back in 2002. So I came into real estate from a perspective of having helped people design and create space and understanding that process. Bohn Real Estate, as you probably all know, we've been in the business now for 67 years. We are still a family-owned operation. And we are the largest brokerage here in the Ithaca marketplace, and we are also now in the Broome County, Binghamton market, as well as in Horseheads / Elmira and Watkins Glen. And I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So just a reminder, people can feel free to put questions in the chat as we go along. And I did want to just take a moment to thank our Networking at Noon series sponsors, which are Hilton Garden Inn, One Step Coaching, CFCU Credit Union, Sharapa Walker, and Sheldrake Point. People who stick with us for the whole time will be entered for a chance to win a bottle of Sheldrake wine, which we will find a way to get to you from the chamber office, where we keep our wonderful wine reserves. So I'm going to be pulling some names and have the panelists help me with pulling those names after we get done with our chat. So thanks for all those wonderful introductions. I learned something new about everyone here. So I sort of set the stage on this a little bit, but I think I'd love to hear from each of you that, you know, given everything that's happened in the last 6 months, and certainly within the context of your broader understanding of the real estate and housing industry sector, tell us what you think the biggest challenges will be to the industry's recovery, and also how you or others that you're working with, recognizing you're all in different roles within your organizations, how are people adjusting their business tactics to overcome those challenges? So why don't we start with Nels? I will switch up which order we ask the panelists questions as we go through, but for now, let's start with Nels.
Yeah. Well, affordable housing is very dependent on public resources. And so the downturn in the economy and that impact on both local, state, and federal governments is the biggest problem I see going forward in trying to build mixed income housing as well as affordable housing, because if those resources are not available, these residential projects just don't pencil out by themselves. They need some subsidy built into them to be successful. So that's the number one concern. I think the other major concern that's coming out of this is just a great deal of uncertainty. Most business sectors and real estate and lenders for real estate don't like to have uncertainty, and I don't know what the value of a market study is going to be right now, because there's just so many what if questions. So I could see that there could be some reluctance for financing in the real estate industry. The final point I want to make is that the downturn and total impact of employment is going to ripple through, and we're very worried about the homeless impact on sheltered housing is a already very noticeable increase in the community, and that's going to be a growing concern if there aren't some more federal funds provided to assist in that regard. So those are the three big problems. I think the response is to really get creative, use as much of the CARES Act funding as we can to deploy it strategically and make a difference. And there is quite a bit of CARES Act funding in the community in a lot of different places, and continue to collaborate with those agencies that provide housing and build housing and be supportive of that network rather than obstructionist. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that.
Ooh, that sounded like a teaser to maybe some follow-up questions later. I don't know, that was interesting. So thanks for that, Nels. Kate, how about asking you that same question? What are you seeing, and what do you think is coming down the pipeline?
I mean, on the theme of creativity, we are, as landscape architects, planners, project managers, we're a pretty adaptable profession. And so it's very possible that the mix of projects, the client type might be changing for us, you know, at any time here. So we are all also doing as much as we can to self-educate on the ways that the pandemic has affected different communities differently, and being aware of those and how the projects that we work on can help to address those. So, I mean, that includes racial and income inequities that are really being highlighted by the pandemic. We're also in an important cultural conversation right now, led by the Black Lives Matter movement. And, you know, I think the challenge is to take these complex questions and make meaningful work out of it for the benefit of all of us. We also, on a more granular level, it's been incumbent on us to be creative in terms of how we reach out to communities. Again, a lot of our work depends on meaningful dialogue with people who live, work, our stakeholders, and have invested their time and money into the cities that we work in. So, you know, as we know, a lot of things are going virtual. We try hard to give people a call. It's important. It's always important to connect at a human level. Meeting in person is always our preference, but now that we're not really able to do that, we're trying really hard to reach out personally, more potentially than usual. So.
I'm sure that folks appreciate that, however you can accomplish that. So Brent, how about you from where you're sitting and in terms of the housing market and any impacts that you're starting to see there?
Yeah, I can certainly echo some of both Nels and Kate's comments. But even before the pandemic hit, we were, as you know, Jennifer, in a marketplace where the availability of housing was already in a difficult place. And so, our adage in this industry is that all real estate is local. And yes, the economic impact globally has been pretty significant. But within our community, since most of our activity, certainly in our brokerage, but also within the real estate community here, is largely the residential real estate segment, when the executive order first came down in the late March, we were already seeing a fairly strong local housing market, right? We had sales up 9% year to date and 12% over the prior year, despite very little inventory available. By the end of April, one full month into the lockdown, our new listing activity was off 61% as sellers were reluctant to welcome people into their homes, and realtors were restricted from conducting business in any face-to-face manner. And that lack of face-to-face, which is so important when you're making these kinds of decisions as a buyer, has really made it very difficult for people. But I will say that by the end of July, 2 months into our phase 2 opening, listing activity had recovered dramatically, and contracting activity had also really jumped by about 28% in July. So we're off a little year over year, but only by about 4%, which has kind of surprised us all, that there was enough activity, enough interest. People were already making plans. They'd taken new jobs and they had to make a move. So on the residential side, I think that we're actually fairly optimistic about the traditional marketplace, if you will. But our biggest challenge has been this rapid adoption of virtual business practices, right? It's been responding to ever-changing guidance from the DOH, requirements imposed by the governor and the Department of State. Our agents are entrepreneurs. They're used to being flexible. But as long as we make available technology and remote support, we can facilitate their efforts. But those who are, we have a demographic within our industry that's largely senior, both the sellers who are moving on to other markets, but also our agents. And those tend to be slower adopters of technology. And that's been a real challenge to provide sort of this parallel of technological support on the one hand, but also backing it up with physical staff and physical plant in order to help people who aren't as comfortable with that continue to conduct their business. And I would say that particularly now with the travel restrictions, the whole issue of monitoring where people are coming from and having to play what amounts to an enforcement arm, right, of the DOH, because we are an industry where we are seeing people face to face and they're trying to get out and they're coming into town largely. I did see a chat comment about understanding that we may be seeing some influx from the East Coast, and that's true. We are getting a lot of people coming in who want to be here now. And so that has really affected, how we can respond to people and service their needs. But just very quickly, to address these challenges, we have decided to make an investment in a much more strong and stable mobile integrated telephone technology, so our agents can pretend like they're in the office with their cell phone more comprehensively, as well as using our website presence and trying to enhance it to become a better tool for our clients to know what's going on with COVID, to understand how it's impacting the ability to do a transaction. But the unknown really is the multifamily and the commercial marketplace. And I think Nels touched on that, right? It's, we don't know, it's too early, there's not enough data. But with the interest on the single family residential and the smaller scale residential marketplace, we're pretty optimistic that we're a small enough community that we'll be attracting people to come follow that growth that we expect to see in the residential marketplace.
Thanks very much for that. Appreciate those wonderful answers to that first question. And I think we probably touched a little bit on what I had prepped you for with the second, the next question here, to talk a little bit more deeply about, looking forward, what are we expecting to see maybe in the next few month horizon? And, again, think Nels just said, well, who could do a market study right now? Nobody knows, right? There's too many variables. There's too many uncertainties. So, we knew what our challenges and opportunities were before, and things might look really different now. But if we look out a few months and then a few years, Brent, I was going to have you maybe share a little bit more about what you're seeing or what you're hearing or think where you think we'll be. And then I was actually hoping that, and that was more for the housing market. And then I was hoping that Kate and Nels could sort of think about that in terms of larger development projects. There's, you work much more often in sort of larger multifamily projects, and there's a lot of those still on deck. So I think people would love to sort of also know, whether you're seeing any changes there, whether everything's sort of business as usual. So this time I'm going to start with Kate, and then we'll move through. And
Sure. We're seeing people really more than ever recognizing the importance of indoor and outdoor connections and flexibility between, connecting your living space to a patio that you might share with your neighbors in an apartment building. And so related to that, we're seeing much more interest in larger communal spaces and potentially smaller living spaces, borrowing from European models. Again, a lot of this is still in conversation, but it's actively shaping, for example, the ways that as part of some of the work we're doing, we're creating these new privately owned public spaces. Those are in conversation with the community. They've always been important, but today it is much more important that we that the large projects in particular that we're working on, whether they are affordable or market rate, have these broader public benefits. So we're hearing that from the community these days.
thanks, Kate. Brent, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, I was intrigued by Kate's comment about this indoor-outdoor connection and the things she's seeing in her industry. It is interesting. I just participated recently in a National Association summit that focused primarily on issues of sustainability and the impact of climate change on urban planning. But there was a segment within it that really dealt with behavioral measurements and demographics, and it seemed really relevant to share. It's really clear that these behavioral changes are already showing up across the country in response to the COVID pandemic in terms of people's relationship with their homes. And this is really primary. Clearly, the long-term takeaway is our relationship with our home has been fundamentally changed and changed, I think, for the long haul. Times and needs have changed. It's just amazing how quickly that's happened. For instance, over a third of buyers have made changes in key features they now seek in the homes that they purchase. Think about space for homeschooling, home offices, places to grow food, right? Space to make room for a returning family member, either because of economic need, right? Or because they've got to do it, they have a care issue that they need to address. A quarter of buyers just in the last few months have changed their preference, of their location preference. They're moving away from densely packed urban areas, right, and environments. And I think the other thing that's really interesting is school location. They make much less of a difference in where people choose to live because so much learning is happening virtually now. You don't necessarily need to be in the district where, where your children are attending school. These have led to interest in larger homes, actually, which is quite a change from a long history of getting into smaller homes. On larger lots, a little more room to breathe, a little more room to grow food, a little more room, right? And consequently, commute times have always been a real consideration for buyers, right? And nearly a quarter of buyers now are now saying the commute times are much less of a concern. And 1 in 10 are saying, I really want to have close access to bike trails or other access to safe outdoor areas. Lastly, what we're watching for now is to see what happens in the interest in buying homes on rural land and buying vacation homes or second homes that have got great internet, so that if world continues to evolve as it has been, it now gives people an option of where they can make their permanent residence, maybe in an area that's very different than they are now. Going forward though, high-speed connectivity, and I really do think that we're going to begin to see, maybe this could be an opportunity for our nodal communities to really begin to be relevant again. We've wanted to see development in Jacksonville and in Dryden and in Varna and in these nice satellite communities because the infrastructure's there. This may be, frankly, a trigger that helps some of that happen.
That's really.
Oh, sorry. Just as a little bit.
Go ahead.
A response to that, in terms of the planning world, there's been a lot of discussion over the past few months about whether we'll be seeing a return to suburbanization of our landscapes and of our communities, and some of the risks that we're all taking with that potential trend. So I think there's room for our smaller cities, our so-called Rust Belt cities, to potentially really benefit, because those sewer lines are in place, those water lines are in place, but the tax base fled the city when it became attractive to do so. So having grown up for most of my teenage years, in particular in Binghamton, New York, I see a place like that posed to really benefit from a trend of moving away from hyper-dense, but keeping density in a well-planned way. So just a note on density.
Yeah, some really interesting things. Yeah. You know, just as like a little micro example, you know, since March, we finally have put in the garden that we always wanted. We have a huge lot, right? We're suburban, we're in Lansing, we're in this little development area, have a huge garden, now some chickens, finally got the hot tub we've wanted, and like I could sit out on my back porch now and be like, why do I need to go anywhere else? It's, you know, we're building everything that we want here. We finally have these amenities that we've had on the list for years, and it finally gave us the time and space that we needed to do that. And I'm sure we're not, I haven't really thought about it under the framework of, if I was looking for a different house now, what would be different in my list, right? We were fortunate we had space for an office, but yeah, that trend from smaller and smaller and having less and less space to suddenly needing more space again is really an interesting thing that you picked up on there, Brent. Nels, what else do you want to share on this topic?
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that residential real estate development is a really long-term process. I mean, some of our projects have started 3 years ago and are just now breaking ground. And, you know, I'm not sure it's that, I think we want to be flexible and not create projects that fit only the moment, because 3 years from now, you'll be in a different market environment perhaps, or maybe the same. I do think there's something to be said that people are re-examining, you know, how they interact with their home. And I've always viewed residential rental real estate as being measured by the number of bedrooms. And now I'm wondering if there are a few other factors besides just the number of 80 square foot bedrooms, you know, and, you know, is there room for a desk in that bedroom, you know, and that outdoor, indoor space that when you're spending all your time in your house, you have a little different relationship with it. I've known relatives in New York City who were living in very expensive, very small apartments, and they had a hard time living through, are having a hard time living through a pandemic environment. So I think folks are going to definitely take a look at those questions. Because it's such a long-term process, though, we're very fortunate that we have a lot of projects in the pipeline, and they're still going forward. They're still flowing. You know, over the last 5 years, we've had about 500 housing units being built per year on average, of which about 12 to 15% of those are affordable, and that's a pretty good ratio. You know, you're getting 60 to 75 new affordable housing units per year, 430 market rate housing units, and that's a pretty robust rate for us. It's more than it was in the last decade or so. So I'm hoping we can continue that trend line going forward. Right now, we've got 3 big projects going forward, you know, with affordable housing. The Art House project over on the flood control channel with 120 units, that's under construction. The state has committed their financing to that project. That's going to go to completion. We're, West End Heights, right next to Collegetown Bakery, Ithaca Bakery, Ithaca Bakery is also a 60-unit project, a mixed project with special needs and affordable housing, about 60 units there, and that's going to go to completion. And we're very hopeful that the project at the Green Street Garage with about 200 housing units will go forward and get its financing in December. And so those are really robust sized projects for us in this community, and that's the good news in the short term. The longer term here is those projects all receive significant support from New York State and from federal government funding. And if we don't have those sources, then this pipeline is going to dry up, and we're not going to see it right away. It's going to be 5 years down the road where we're saying nobody's building any affordable housing anymore. And it's going to be a reaction to the circumstances now. So I think in the short term, things look good. And in fact, the city's only bright spot in its budget right now is building permits and site plan review revenues are running a little ahead of budget. Everything else, every other revenue source is behind. So there's a glimmer of good news in the development field at the moment.
Really interesting. So yeah, Jason has had a couple of questions and sort of comments in the chat here. And I don't know whether, even going back to Brent, you were citing some specific studies and or industry information. Is there a recipe for strategically building the housing that people want and meeting their needs, while also still trying to support small hamlets versus, giant houses on giant lots that are contributing to rural sprawl? Does anyone want to, either comment more on anything they've observed or how we could strategically plan this better as a community, if that is a direction that things are going to go? Because it's very contrary to what generally most of our towns and villages and the city and the county have all clearly stated as goals around development and climate, addressing climate issues over the last several years.
Yeah, I think that there's still just not quite enough data to know, right, what's going to happen here in our community. That the research that I was sharing was a national study, but I do think it mirrors a lot of what we're seeing. The whole question though of building on large lots, I mean, that requires also an ability to afford to do that. Right, and new construction of single-family residential homes has been a barrier for a long time in our community. So I'm less. I'm not yet seeing, or we're not yet seeing, a lot of contracts being let for new big homes out in rural lands. That to me is as much going to have to be a zoning and planning question going forward. Like, what do we do now, right? And zoning is really a double-edged sword, right? As we have a conversation about access to affordable housing, about inclusiveness, zoning can be both inclusionary and exclusionary. And so I think that really what's going to happen here is we're going to have to, as a community, have re-engage in those conversations so that we do allow those who have a very real desire to be a little further away from the denseness of an urban environment, but still part of a community, be able to find a place for themselves. I'm not yet at a point where I could certainly say or see that we're going to start seeing our wonderful rural landscape get chopped up into 3 to 5 acre lots with houses on them. I'm not sure that that's really in the cards. But, and because we are a smaller urban community, I'm not so sure we'll see the same kind of flight that other bigger communities are. But I do think it's just something to be aware of, that if you don't have to go to work, you don't have to commute. And you don't have to commute, especially if those nodal communities have resources. So to me, it's also that age-old question of, do you provide the housing or do you provide the community services first? And, smaller places to shop, smaller places to see a doctor, smaller places to get the services you need, maybe an environmentally very smart thing to do, right? So too early to tell, but I think it's a great conversation to continue having.
Yeah, just to continue on that, what we're really talking about are municipalities making decisions. The city of Ithaca has an amazing amount of resources in terms of its own staff and budget, but we're surrounded by rural landscapes that have very different resources in both of those terms. So the question that needs to be answered is, how do we define making community, and what services, what does that mean? If the priority is to be able to walk to services, then we are talking about an investment in things like sidewalks and new development contributing to that, whether it is a single family house or larger projects. And also treating, as we've talked on the sidelines of the internet being considered a community service and a community piece of infrastructure. I mean, it is unacceptable that my colleagues that live farther afield can almost barely join Zoom calls because they're far out in their beautiful home in the hills, only about 20 miles from here. So I think it depends on us to talk about the values that we want to have. And also this, I've seen visualizations done here in Ithaca during the Form Ithaca conversations, the Plan Ithaca conversations. There were real visualizations that you can see what our landscapes become if trends as they are continue. There's a lot more small houses chopping up the landscape. It's possible, it could happen, and it does boil down to zoning and community priorities.
Can I just jump in for one issue on that? I agree entirely that there's an issue of a need for community facilities to support a denser development pattern than half acre or 1 acre where you have septic in your own well. So I think that one of the key issues looking at real estate is, particularly if it's somebody focused on affordable single family homes, is what, they look at a lot with street frontage and compare the cost of developing that house versus doing it in a clustered setting or something. And almost every time it's cheaper to build on an existing street. You don't have to build a road. And you just have enough land area right now. Right now, our land is inexpensive enough to do that, and it may not be true, later on. But if we really wanted to encourage investments in places like Jacksonville and Danby and hamlets like that, I think we really need to step up and find a way to help support the infrastructure of water and sewer in those places. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense economically to go that direction in many cases, unless you have a really larger scale project that you're able to do. In most cases, a rural community is not ready for a larger scale project. So witness what's going on in Trumansburg with INHS's project. That's running into a lot of headwinds, and it's not even a very large scale project, and it has home ownership as well as rental in it. And so there's a lot of challenges to getting a project built like that. The community really wants that kind of pattern to be preserved with hamlets. I think we need to really step up and look at ways to make it financially feasible to do those projects.
Wow, great conversation. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper. Earlier in the conversation, Brent, we were talking about, in part of your intro, you were sharing some of the challenges, particularly with just managing the new workflow and the technology, and just people are coming. It's interesting because a lot of your agents are independent contractors, right? They're not necessarily direct employees, but we can look at them as though they're Warren's workforce, just like we could if another employer who's dealing with a now dispersed workforce, likely working in all kinds of different conditions, and the challenges of trying to meet those needs. And then the challenges of trying to meet the needs of your clients. I know we're actually a little bit fortunate here in that probably with more regularity than most markets, we do have people buy houses in Ithaca sight unseen. Or like they've seen the listing online and they might buy it if they're from somewhere else and have the money to do so, but that's obviously rare, right? So just share more about what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, how complex this is from your perspective and for your other for your colleagues.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, because we have always been a face-to-face business, the elimination of that as an option at the end of March really just changed things overnight, right? And I have to applaud the state for how quickly it issued guidance for all of our industries. But our guidance was very restrictive. We were not an essential business. And many of the ancillary businesses to real estate at the time were not essential businesses. Home inspectors were not essential businesses. There was some question about whether even appraisers were essential businesses, right? And so it took a while to sort of sort that piece out. But for the first 10 weeks or so, up until phase 2, I mean, we were doing everything virtually. Yes, we were doing Zoom showings of property, one agent in a property, nobody else in the house. Broadcasting it to their client, answering questions, and clients making offer that way. We had contingencies that said, at some point, I want to see this thing, right? But, or agents going and opening a house, leaving, a buyer going and walking through a house unaccompanied, which we'd never feel comfortable with doing, but there's sometimes the only way you can accommodate their ability to see the property, going back in after them, disinfecting everything, and then calling them up and saying, what'd you think, right? And that's really the way we did it for 10 weeks. And but what also happened is sellers got very nervous, and a lot of them pulled their listings off the market or held back on putting their listings on the market. And normally February, March, boy, that's when they all come on, right? And our listings just plummeted. But once we got to phase 2 and the restrictions were you can conduct face-to-face business following health and safety guidelines, we very quickly rebounded, and business, while not normal, was certainly improved. But it is really being empathetic and cautious and mindful of the invisibility of this disease has really made all of our agents have to be have a much more complicated and cautious approach to engagement. And we have health screenings they have to do every day, every time they meet somebody. We've got COVID disclosures. We've got all kinds of things. And if they answer their health screening and say they were in Virginia yesterday, we got to send them home, right? So those challenges are real, but we're doing it, and we're doing it. I think actually I'm really impressed, frankly, with how the industry and the community overall, not just our brokers, but the other ones, have said, I get it. This is important to do. We're a community that seems to understand the importance of controlling this thing, and we'll do it. And as I said before, year to date, we're only off 4%. So sellers have adapted, buyers have adapted, lenders have adapted, appraisers were doing virtual appraisals for a long time, but we figured it out. And if it stays like this for foreseeable future, I think we'll still be able to help people find homes.
Thanks for that. That's it's good to hear. It's pretty incredible that you're within 5% of 2019 numbers. It's interesting. You just mentioned lenders too, and I don't want to start a big tangent here, but one thing we experienced, we had already been in the process of refinancing our home, and everything had been in prior to March 15th-ish. And at any rate, even though it was all approved, all the documentation was in, right before closing, the bank told us they wanted everything all over again, and they wanted all current information. And so because they're having to re-verify income for both residential buyers and those refinancing, I'm sure that there's probably some similar and even more intense scrutiny going on the commercial side, or if businesses are looking to make changes right now. And so that just adds another dimension, right, to the process and the length of time and how difficult it might be able to get to closing on some of these potential projects and even on residential, because people's circumstances, could change pretty quickly. And so it was just interesting to sort of learn that along the way. And I've had a couple of other conversations with lenders about that since then. That just extra hoops that people are having to jump through that make things a little bit more complicated. So
I Oh yeah, absolutely. We're seeing 2 to 4 week delays at least now in the timeline on doing a thing from contract to close.
Mhm.
And you're right, people who were in the pipeline before are having to get revetted.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah. And as
understand.
long as everyone adjusts their expectations and people, I mean, now that people know about it, right, we can plan for it, which is good. But
Yeah.
bit of a
Unless you have
surprise
to,
back in March.
move before it closes, and then you got an issue, right? So
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
yeah.
So I want to move us to talk more about a little bit more about the affordable market and ask Nels to share anything else he sees that might be evolving and changing in the market. This was an area where, you know, a lot of community resources were locally being put into trying to address the affordability concerns. We've talked about this a lot, but we have, you know, there's lower to moderate income housing that's a little bit easier to build and more available. And then there's higher end, or what we might call oftentimes market rate housing. And then there's a gap in between, right? That's a little bit harder for us to achieve. So we've all talked about that a lot. But curious whether, you know, as we look forward, whether we think there will be more money or less money coming down for projects like that, how, you know, as how the market might change as well. I'm interested. We don't really know what's going to happen with how many students will continue living in town versus being remote, or for what period of time some of these market disruptions are going to be impacting the community. So just looking to hear more in terms of what you're thinking and seeing around the affordable market.
Yeah. Yeah, we're trying to get a handle on that. You know, government's pretty good at looking at data from 2 years ago and then telling you what happened last year. But going forward, it's a little harder to figure it out. One program we have going right now is an emergency rental assistance program, and it's designed for folks who have had an adverse COVID-19 impact, largely unemployment being the leading culprit here. And are having trouble making their rent. And so we created a program with INHS to provide a program which would cover 3 months of rent for people who fell in that category. We fully expected that program to be oversubscribed within hours, if not days. We're in week 6 now, and only 25 households have qualified for that funding and we have funding for at least 50, and maybe we would go back and find funding for more if there was more demand. That's in the city only. There's another county program separate, very similarly tracked. But I think what that points out to is that the CARES Act has been incredibly successful at cushioning the impact for the first couple of months of this pandemic for folks, because the condition for getting the emergency assistance is you have to show you don't have the resources to pay your rent. And if the unemployment benefits and the individual payment that were provided through CARES Act probably covered many households' needs for that first couple of months. But now we're at the point where there is no more supplemental unemployment assistance. There's no stimulus program bill that seems to be moving fast through Congress. So the big question is, where are we going to be, 1, 2, 3 months from now? So we're very concerned about that impact and how that's going to work out. That program's still available. So if you know anybody who falls in that, in that scenario, have them talk with Ithaca Neighborhood Housing Services. There is a limit on income as well as a limit on assets to be eligible for that program. But overall, I think what we're going to see is we're going to have more people who are housing unstable, and that's going to create a need for additional affordable housing. And I think that will mean that the programs that are out there will shift more towards those who are most vulnerable and with the greatest need. So I think where we've been working to try to have a full spectrum of housing that meets people's needs at low income, middle income, and market rate, I think we're going to see this is going to push that away from that middle market and push it down towards those who are the most vulnerable, because there's just going to be more people in that category. We, as a community, we want to provide those that have no other choice. If you're in middle income, you can find something that's not as desirable, but you're going to have to pay more than you want for a housing unit that's less than you want. But if you don't have any choices at all, you end up, homeless or shifting around with very unstable housing. So I think that's a trend we're going to see, and we're going to have to really struggle to find ways to meet those other segments of the market. I'm really pleased to see that the Tompkins County Industrial Development Agency recently adopted a policy to encourage when somebody is building market rate housing, they'll be asked to provide some workforce housing in that project, 20%, or make a payment in lieu into the Community Housing Development Fund so that we can build some of the other types of housing that's not there. And I think we're also seeing, probably generally speaking in the market, that the upper income housing market was very strong, had untapped demand, and we're finally seeing that probably starting to level out a little bit more. And that is good because that distorted the real estate market, and that people who wanted to have higher quality, newer structures couldn't find them. They were taking units that middle income people would have purchased, and those middle income people were taking places that starting families would have taken. So hopefully this will kind of normalize the market out a little bit. A little bit of vacancy is not bad. Brent may not agree with that. a little bit of vacancy is not bad to make it a better market for the consumer. We've had a long time period where we haven't had much choice for consumers, or if they have had choice, it's with lots of compromises. So I do think there's going to be continued support for affordable housing projects, but I'm really worried that the impact on the state budget and the city budget is going to make it harder in the short term to find out those resources. Oh, one final thing. The market area that I think is really almost decimated in some respects is the office market. Our office and retail are really having difficulties. Our gold standard is to build a mixed income, mixed use project, and then you have a non-residential use on the ground floor. It's hard to imagine exactly what use, developers are going to, productive use or profitable use are going to find for the first floor when retail is, bricks and mortar retail is struggling. And now we're seeing office workforces saying they can work from home and not demanding as much office space. That's going to be another challenge. I think you're asking for solutions, not challenges, but it's an impact.
Well, if we don't know what the challenges are, we won't be able to get creative about solutions. So I think it's important to identify them. I do think maybe you're making somewhat of an argument that the city in some areas will need to consider their requirements for active use and what those active use, maybe there needs to be an expansion on what's going to be considered active use for some of those spaces in future projects. So that was all really wonderful information. I wanted to move back to Kate for a moment and just ask her a little bit more about the market rate category, which could be a really broad set of price ranges, I think, and it could mean a lot of different things. So there's been a lot of projects, though, built downtown, such as City Center, which is a project you've been involved in. There's Herald Square coming online in the next many months. The new City Harbor project. There's a lot of things that have come on in the last couple of years that are considered more market rate. I think some people look at the rental rates and they seem high for them, but they're still considered, market rate because there is a market for them and there are people who will pay those rates, right? So talk to us more about that component of the market and all the recent developments in those areas, and also maybe what's on deck and why it's an important part of our residential real estate market.
Sure. It's always interesting when those projects are starting, when you're talking with your client and they're like, this is a unique environment to be building and planning in, isn't it? Like, this community is really involved, potentially more than other communities. It's kind of like our major league sport in Ithaca. So we benefited from really the clients themselves who understand that Ithaca is unique in some ways, and that their projects, there is this give and take with community benefits and meeting the goals of the projects themselves that might not be possible without that partnership and that understanding and respect, both with our clients and the municipality. So City Center is a great example of a dense, 8-story mixed-use project that replaced surface level parking and a low-density bank that was downtown. Now we have 8 stories of market rate with at least 3 storefronts and a lot of landscape. And they really made the most of that site, and it has made that corner downtown at the end of the commons, it's made it this incredible corner. It really, I mean, that itself, in terms of the built environment, is a public benefit of the project. It's just a good looking, you really feel like you've arrived to downtown when you enter that space, which is really exciting. You mentioned a couple of others. So the City Harbor project is coming online. Hopefully will start next year or so. It's still in its approvals. So that project is among several that our firm is working on, largely in response to the recent rezoning of the waterfront zone, to try to bridge our developed Ithaca to the other side of Route 13, really, and connect better to our waterfront. So City Harbor has, it's a mixed use development, but it also has a component of the medical office services. But there are the massive public benefits of that project that include the marina that will still be in use. There's a new promenade that we're very excited about that will link right up to the Cayuga Waterfront Trail. There's a series of public parks. There will eventually be another kayak launch in that area. And so those public benefits, while they're for everyone, it also really adds to the quality of life if you're a resident there, because, I mean, people watching is just, it's just a pleasure to see other people, maybe more than usual these days, but these public benefits are actually really valuable to the projects themselves, and our clients have recognized that, and we're excited to see these things built. So those are a few market rate. We've also, our firm is working on the Carpenter Park project. That's another more mixed project. It has market rate, affordable, and the medical office component. That's working at a major municipal level for a curb cut on Route 13. And again, that'll ultimately have the effect of making the Route 13 corridor more accessible for pedestrians and cyclists, which again, it's a huge community benefit. And that area is like this, it's like a missing, it's like a big gap. You know, you're going, now we have the Farmers Market and Green Star, and that project will be right in the middle of that. As Nels mentioned, the Asteri project, that's more of an affordable housing, that is an affordable housing project, but it's a great example of this, of how the private-public partnerships can take on these really complex design challenges, like we have to do for all of our projects. You know, we have to get through the red tape, and we can only do that when we're working on them together. So those are a couple examples of our Ithaca-based projects.
Thanks, Kate. So we're getting close on time. If anyone has any final questions, now would be a good time to put it in the chat box. Jason, thanks for your thinking and your comments. Some of these are, I think, more just good contributions on your part. So thanks for those. Sort of the final thing, if you could each just within a minute or so, tell us what makes you most optimistic or excited as you think to the future for your work and this industry, real estate and housing. So put your hopeful, optimistic hats on and tell us what you're excited about. I guess I'm gonna go back to having Nels go first.
Well, I think the trend, you know, what we've seen in the city is continued development in the face of the pandemic in terms of new housing projects coming forward. So that's very, very good news to hear. I think long term, the market has attracted and the community has supported high quality developers. And I think we are building a core of high quality developers, both for profit and not for profit developers. not-for-profit INHS has set the mark for that for a long time. Vicino has come into the market and is doing high-quality projects. There are others. Tompkins Community Action does projects on a regular basis every couple of years as well, and so that's very positive. But I think we're also seeing enlightened developers coming to the enlightened city, and really developing the kind of projects Kate was talking about. Considering the community benefits and really thinking about a long-term investment. It may not return that immediate investment as high as it would have been if they could, privatize everything, but at the long-term value of that real estate investment, I think is going to bear it out in the long term and be of value to them. So the developers working on the Carpenter Park and the, and the other project, what are they called?
City
I
Harbor.
forget that. Yeah, City Harbor project, go by a couple different names, have really, brought forward those community interests. And I think those are the kind of projects that can really gain public support and show people that they don't have to be opposed to every project in your neighborhood. It could be an amenity to you rather than a detraction.
Kate, how about you?
So the question was about looking toward the future and the optimism I have. Hope is the best motivator, right? Not fear of market change or anything else. So I am hopeful that this moment of the pandemic and the ongoing racial inequity conversation that we're having is allowing all of us a little bit of a pause and asking, like, what are our priorities? And prioritization really helps projects. It helps design. We might not be able to do everything we want, but what do we need to do that's essential, meaningful, and important? So hopefully that way of thinking helps our design, helps projects, helps fill in the development areas that are out there and are ever changing. So I'm just hopeful that this continues to shape our dialogue, and in a way the past few months has allowed us to be a little more open-minded, a little more humble, and I think we're recognizing that we all have something to learn from each other these days. And I hope that we're asking the question of, what are the benefits of this project? Is this good for the well-being of the community in the long term? And that can look a lot of different ways. So that's what I'm hopeful about.
Thanks, Kate. That's wonderful. How about you, Brent?
I really like the way that Kate, described her optimism, and she's right. I mean, we are now engaged in I think, very dynamic and important conversations. I mean, anytime there's a sea change in something as fundamental as our relationship to home, right, and our relationship to our place of business, and our relationship to our community, well, all we can expect out of that is some unfolding of some opportunity, right? I mean, we are going to come out of this with some real opportunities to have those important conversations. It is really still too early to tell from where I sit on what the future of the retail world looks like, or the business environment in terms of physical bricks and mortar looks like. But I think that Kate's absolutely right. We are now looking for how do we move forward from here and continue to create this sort of healthy, right, vibrant, welcoming community that we all want, both here in Ithaca and across the southern tier. I echo her earlier comments about some of these sort of Rust Belt communities. I mean, I'm imagining we're going to see things happening in Elmira that haven't happened in years, right? And in Binghamton, certainly, we're already seeing a lot of activity in Binghamton. So that to me is cause for optimism. I also think the fact that we've learned how productive we can be remotely. Our agents can be productive. We can all be productive remotely. That means we can expand our presence, we can expand our services, we can expand and attract new talent without necessarily having to be restrained by physical space. And to me, I think that's actually exciting, right? Because it means we can expand our ability to hire and retain and grow people and their skills and their talent without having to worry about an office for them and a phone for them to be able to answer, right? To me, that's very exciting. And as a brokerage, while we're still trying to grow our technology support, we're making a commitment now to expand our bricks and mortar. We're actually putting a second office in Binghamton now, because we really believe we got to be part of that process of continuing to invest in our local communities, show a meaningful commitment to the community, and while servicing our community's needs. So I'm not, I'm pretty optimistic, actually, and I think it's because of the fact that we are in a unique place geographically. I think and I think because we're in a unique place economically, that I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful that our communities will be engaged and will be creating space for everybody.
Well, thanks again to all of you for sharing your experience and your insights on what's going on and what we might be seeing in the next period of time in the real estate and housing industry. I would love to invite 2 of you to help me pick a number 1 through 10 so that we can give away a couple bottles of wine. So Nels, why don't you tell me your favorite number between 1 and 10?
4.
All right, that is Scott Whitham.
Yay, wonderful.
Yay. Ooh, there's Scott. Hi, Scott.
Hey, excellent. Well done. Really interesting conversation. Thanks.
Well, thanks for being here. And Kate, you get to pick the next number.
7.
Oh, it's our most engaged participant, Jason. You, Haremza? I don't want to pronounce your, Haremza, is that how I pronounce your name? Well, hopefully it's close enough. I don't like to do a bad job with anyone's names. So thank you again to everyone who joined us. We appreciate it. It's great to get together and have meaningful conversations, at least once a month. And of course we do it more frequently than that. But again, it's been interesting to transition this to our, monthly have lunch together and have a conversation about a different industry sector from within our membership. I don't know offhand what our September sector is going to be, but I hope you will be able to join us if it's of interest to you. And again, we appreciate our panelists for taking the time to be with us today, and to all of you who joined us, thank you so much. And thanks again to our series sponsors who help the Chamber put on this programming all year long.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for the invite.
Thanks.
Yes,
Thanks everyone.
thanks so much.
Take care.